Very much, Russ, and thank you very much to the Vancouver East Liberals for putting on this event. And although this is a Liberal event, and although the Liberal Party is the only major federal party right now that has this as a policy position, I want to assure you that this is not, in fact, a one-party political issue. This issue goes across parties. I happen to be a Liberal member of the Liberal Party myself. However, in 2013, I ran for the Marijuana Party in the BC election. Jody ran for the Green Party in the BC election. Dana is a proud member of the NDP Party. He leads a group within the NDP called End Prohibition. He may not have got his leader beat into shape yet, but he's not given up. And John received a Diamond Jubilee Medal. When was that, John? A couple years ago? And that medal was awarded to John by Pierre-Claude Nolan, a conservative senator, for his work in drug policy reform. So this is not a one-party issue. This is an issue that goes across parties. Another interesting comment, one day last week I spent some time in the Liberal Party headquarters phoning out for this event, encouraging people to come to it. And one gentleman ripped my ear off, telling me that the Liberals were running a one-issue campaign. Well, I thought that was a little unfair, given that at least 70% of the time I hear Trudeau talking, he's talking about the economy, and 90% of the time I hear Ralph Goodale talking, he's talking about the economy. So I thought this guy was a little off base. But more importantly, this one issue, the issue of prohibition, it is the test of how a politician or how a political party thinks about policy. Is that politician or is that party thinking about policy from the viewpoint of dogmatic ideology, from the viewpoint of blind emotion, from the viewpoint of political convenience, or from the viewpoint of evidence-based policy? This is the test of that, because if you operate on the basis of evidence-based policy, which is the only way I want to ever operate, you cannot come to any conclusion except that prohibition is the worst public policy we could think of if we tried. Now, I work in a place full of cubicles. Who's a fan of the comic strip Dilbert? Anybody know the comic strip Dilbert? Okay. I work in that kind of place. I have personally met and argued with Alice. I know who she is. I've met her. She's a great person. She is just like that. It's not a real name, but she really is like that. I've worked in that kind of environment for 33 years. And no, I didn't start when I was 10. I turned 57 just 3 weeks ago. So, my experience is in business, in management. I also have an MBA specializing in policy economics. So, although I am here speaking somewhat on behalf of L.E.A.P, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, I am not an official L.E.A.P speaker, and that's important. Official L.E.A.P speakers must be people who have worked in law enforcement or are working in law enforcement. Unfortunately, none of them are available right now, and some of the reasons for that are very painful. None of them are available right now, and so I'm here as a stand-in. I'm a civilian member of L.E.A.P, so is John. Anyone can be a civilian member. We have brochures at the back and membership forms at the back if you're interested. And civilian members normally don't speak. In my case, this is an exception in this case. But what we always do is support the real speakers in their mission of educating the public about prohibition. What do we at L.E.A.P mean by prohibition? Quite specific. Prohibition means saying it is illegal for a buyer and seller to engage in a transaction they both want to do, and that doesn't affect a third party. So, for instance, if I want to pay Russ to go and break Neil's legs, hey, Neil didn't go along with that transaction. So A prohibition that says I'm not allowed to pay Russ to break Neil's legs, that isn't prohibition by L.E.A.P's definition. L.E.A.P's definition of prohibition is I would want to get a bottle of beer, and I go to Dana and say, sell me a bottle of beer, and he says, sure, I'd like to sell you a bottle of beer. What's the price when we do it?
I only have weed.
You only have weed. See, Dana has ethics. He doesn't want to sell me something really bad for me, right? So prohibition is disallowing a transaction that both the buyer and seller want to have, and that doesn't affect a third party. And of course, these days in our society, the main thing we prohibit is drugs, like marijuana. The big political issue for L.E.A.P, and John already said this, it's no wonder he's a civilian member like me, the big issue is not how safe or how dangerous marijuana is. It is true that marijuana is safer than many other drugs. It's true that it has a lot of enormous medical benefits. And you should take some time at the end to talk to Joy. You can easily recognize her. She's got more red on than anybody else. Talk to Joy about her medical marijuana efforts and her petition to get the provinces which run healthcare to actually take this stuff seriously medically. But while that is true, that is not L.E.A.P's issue. L.E.A.P's issue is not how good or bad a drug is. L.E.A.P's issue is how bad prohibition is. So now, I'm going to take a little time. And here is the most important part of my talk, because the speakers from L.E.A.P, the law enforcement members, they have a perspective and a knowledge of prohibition that is far different than yours or mine. They have the knowledge that comes from spending years or decades trying to enforce this failed policy. They know what happens when that policy meets the real world, where the rubber hits the road, where real people get involved. And I'm just going to tell you some of their stories. Peter Christ, retired police captain from Tonawanda, New York. It's a city of over 100,000 people. An event happened once in that town. A lady called up the police department and said, "There's a guy on the corner of my street selling drugs. Will you do something about it?" Well, they looked, and luckily, at that moment, there was a car with two plainclothes guys in it, 1 block away. And they weren't busy at that moment, so they called that unit. The unit went over, saw the guy sell drugs, picked him up, headed back to the station. 3 minutes later, the lady calls. "When are you going to do something about the guy outside my window selling drugs? I just called. When are you going to do something about it?" And the person at the desk said, "Well, madam, I suggest you look out your window. We just got that guy." And she said, "I am looking out my window, and there's a guy out there selling drugs." What happened? Anybody know what happened? Another guy showed up. When the officers picked up the first drug dealers, what they did was they created a job opportunity. That job opportunity was filled before the first person was back at the police station. Tell you another story. Jerry Cameron, police chief from Florida. Here's his story. "I remember taking a small area of my community and completely cleaning it up, trampling all over the edges of the Constitution to do so, and getting all of the dope dealers out of there. And to my dismay, 90 days later, I had a Haitian group move in from downstate. I had the Miami boys move in from Jacksonville. They were shooting machine guns and beating people mercilessly. I wanted my old dope dealers back. All I had done was create a big job opportunity." Jim Girac, prosecuting attorney from Illinois. "We do huge drug seizures, which obviously evidence the failure of the war on drugs. It's not a success to have a ton of drugs seized." Why did he say it's not a success? If you seize a ton of drugs, why is that not a success? There's 5 times, 10 times more somewhere else, that's why. "And then once we seize them, we burn the drugs, as if we're acting on behalf of the drug cartels, so they remain the exclusive sellers of the drugs. So So law enforcement is basically working for the cartels and for the street gangs with this insane prohibition we have in place. So there's one thing that we've learned, the L.E.A.P speakers and L.E.A.P experienced law enforcers have learned. When you enforce a drug law, nothing changes. You take one person off the street. You take Chapo Guzman out of Mexico. Another one comes in. And what never changes is the supply of drugs on the street. Now here's another story. James Mooney, DEA agent in the western U.S. I had a couple of people wired making some buys inside of a home, and I could hear everything that was going on. And then I heard a little boy crying out for his mother. And I knew that I was going to take both parents away for no less than 10 years. And it just kind of struck me that, holy mackerel, I'm more of a problem than a solution. Stephen Downing, former Deputy Police Chief of Los Angeles County. You have things like grants, you have things like asset seizures that are used as tools by the federal government to buy off local law enforcement. When the 4 AGs in California decided to attack our medical marijuana dispensaries, they sent ahead $72 million to local law enforcement. That $72 million took our police officers, who were supposed to be out investigating crimes against persons, rapes, robberies, burglaries, thefts of cars, and things like that. Those dollars turn our police officers into drug warriors. And that $72 million is just a tiny example. In other words, the way you get your money as a police department is you take your officers away from investigating the burglaries, assaults, rapes, and murders. You put them on drugs because that's what you're going to get paid for. Think about any of you who've worked in management, think about what that does. What are you going to do when you're in charge of the budget? Think of the pressure it puts on you. Eric Sterling. Eric Sterling was the counsel to the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee and was one of the major authors of the mandatory minimum laws in the U.S. Those mandatory minimum laws are what Harper somewhat imitated a couple of years ago, except that the U.S. laws are much worse. Here's what Eric Sterling says. My role in writing the mandatory minimums was the worst thing I have ever done. I have met the children and the mothers of people in prison for unjustly long sentences because of these laws. And they are just dozens of the thousands, tens of thousands of people who are in federal prison for way too long. There's a woman who calls me from prison. She has a son who was 9 years old when she went to prison. The son attempted to commit suicide. The son has run away. The son misses his mother. You think about the families that are screwed up. The kid doesn't know anything about this. The kid is being hurt. The mother had a boyfriend who was a dope dealer, and the dope dealer said that the mother stored the drugs. She said, I didn't store any drugs in my home. If there were any drugs in the house, it was the boyfriend. I had nothing to do with it. This is a woman who has no money. Her car is repossessed. She's not a dope dealer. She's struggling to take care of her kids. She lives in public housing. She has nothing. She's doing 235 months. She's doing almost 20 years. Jack Cole, retired narcotics officer from New Jersey and one of the founders of L.E.A.P. They took undercover people like myself and they targeted us against small friendship groups of young people in college. And as soon as we got in there and became their friends, come a Friday night, somebody would say, hey, school's out, we're off work, anyone want to get high? And of course, if nobody said that, that was our job. If somebody simply passed a marijuana cigarette to me, they became a drug dealer. Every one of them went to prison for 7 years. Nearly 1,000 young folks, just starting out in the world, just getting their education, ended up in prison for 7 years as a direct result of what I did out there as just one undercover agent. And then when Jack tells this story, at this point he sort of pauses and gets very quiet and he says, that's a lot of lives to destroy. I I can't tell you how many of those young folks would have gone on to have a perfectly productive life had I not intervened. But I'm sure the number is huge. And Jack carries with him every minute, knowing that he destroyed the lives of 1,000 people at least. So what are some of the lessons we can learn from the law enforcers who have been given the unfair and horrible job of enforcing these laws? One thing we can learn is that there is no such thing as a war on drugs. There is no such thing as being tough on drugs. You know, we hear politicians talk about being tough on drugs, and it used to make me feel good to hear that. I used to believe Prohibition was okay. A lot of people, when some politicians say, we're going to be tough on drugs, they get a warm feeling. Well, I have some drugs here. Let's be tough on them. Mandatory minimum, 2 years. You scared? I'm not tough enough, am I? Okay, we'll get tougher. 3 strikes and you're out. That's 20 years hard time. Am I getting through to you? Okay, let's go all Clint Eastwood here. This is a 44 Magnum. Blow a man's head right off. Do you feel lucky, punk? How much did I just achieve being tough on drugs? You can't be tough on drugs. You can only be tough on people. You can only be tough on people. On people like Mark Emery. On people like the kid whose parents James Moody took away. On people like the 1,000 young people Jack Cole put away for 7 years. That's who you're tough on. And I'm not going to go into all of these statistics, although I have them enough to bore you for a couple of hours about all of the costs and destruction and damage done by the war on drugs, and how all of that I just described from a law enforcement point of view turns into the destruction of civil liberties, economic devastation. You go to the center of a city like Baltimore or someplace like that, where Prohibition has made the drug trade the only game in town, it's like a war zone. All the cost to taxpayers, all the lost potential, all the wasted resources. I'm not going to go into the hours worth of statistics about that. The only thing I'm going to do is going to close off with the words of Neil Franklin, 30-year veteran of the Baltimore and Maryland police forces, currently the executive director of L.E.A.P. We have to dismantle the system of drug prohibition. It needs to go, period. There's no tinkering with it. There's no trying to fix it. It needs to be dismantled. Another day, another hour is too long to wait.